The controller told us that these objects had been observed for over 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space.
Is there a correlation between any of the characteristics of these UAPs, UFOs?
What we tend to see are the smaller vehicles tend to be, think of a sports car. The large ones tend to be not always, but almost exclusively either triangular shape or boomerang shape.
Werewolves?
I see dead people walking around like regular people. They don't see each other. They only see what they want to see. They don't know they're dead.
The UFO, UAP community was fairly surprised. Shocked might be a better word.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human.
Do you think there is life on other planets?
Well, I'm not quite sure, but I suppose there would be.
I've seen a flying saucer.
You've seen one?
Yes, definitely. At Lane Cove.
When was this?
1953.
You don't think this is a figment of your imagination?
Several other people with me saw it.
I'm not wishing that all that stay with me.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
There is now a new UFO whistleblower with some major bombshell level statements.
There is very compelling evidence that we
This episode is brought to you by 7 completely awesome people. Lisa Bowden, Tabin Rice, Kelly Lewis, Mecca Mickey, Diane Boss, Jeanette Angel, and Dorothy Hawkins. And a special thank you to all of the subscribers on YouTube and followers on Spotify. If you wish to support the podcast, you can hit that join button below to help become an Eyes to That Sky member. Or if you want to join our Patreon or provide other support, the links are below in the show description. But now, on with the show. Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, where we explore the unexplained and mysterious phenomena that have occurred throughout the state of Michigan and beyond.
From UFO sightings to ghostly encounters, we delve deep into the stories, the evidence, and the theories behind these strange events.
We are your hosts. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wayne.
We are an educator duo that after an encounter with a triangular UFO in 2018 in Michigan, we decided to investigate UFOs and the paranormal. In this podcast, we will be speaking with eyewitnesses, experts, and researchers to uncover the truth about some of the most intriguing cases of paranormal activity in and around Michigan.
Our goal is not to convince anyone of the existence of these phenomena, but rather to provide a platform for discussion and exploration. So, buckle up and join us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole.
On an escalator.
All right, coming to you live from southeastern Michigan within the shadow of the great Motor City, Detroit, Michigan. And we are tucked away in our little humble abode. We want to welcome you and everyone to the show. It is May 19th, 2024. And just want to say Michelle is here. As you can see, her picture over there. But she's off camera.
But it is like I am the great and powerful Oz.
You are the great and powerful Oz, behind the curtain running things.
If I start pushing my voice too badly, I start coughing.
Yeah.
So, and then Wayne gives me dirty looks.
I do. I have to give you dirty looks at some point. So, but yes. So welcome everybody. Just really quick, want to just give a quick shout out and mention to the following things. First of all, as always, if you want to contact us, you can hit up our email at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. Share your stories with us, share your encounters, whatever it is, and we'll be putting together a show with listener communications coming up here soon. So be ready for that. We've got some great stories and some interesting videos that have been submitted to us for our Facebook group. So yeah.
Yeah, and we've got some things up our sleeve for this summer too.
Yes, we do. So also, if you wanted to make a donation to the podcast, as always, you can do that with super chats. You can buy us a coffee. There's PayPal. You can join our Patreon, or you can just hit that little join button below and become an Eyes to That Sky member. So go ahead and do that for a low monthly fee that helps us out. And then finally, we are getting closer to our 100th episode. Doing this with Bruce Solheim tonight will be our 89th episode. So we're closing in on the big 100. And in celebration, we're going to have a get together right here in our little local town of New Boston. And there's a little Coney Island called New Boston Coney and Grill. We're still working on a date and everything for that. But if you've ever heard the commercial for New Boston and checked it out, you know, it's just a little place that has great food, great friends. And we thought it would be a good idea to just have like a little get together. So once we get that date worked out and everything, we will let everybody know. So keep an ear open for that. And I think that's it. Michelle, was there anything you wanted to add before we get into this tonight?
I think that we need to get our guest on.
All right, let's do this. So tonight is going to be a fantastic show. And it's because we have a fantastic guest. So Dr. Bruce Olav Solheim was born to Norwegian immigrant parents. He served in the U.S. Army as a jail guard and then ended up to become a helicopter pilot. Very interesting jump, but hey, in the military, you can do those kind of things. He is the first in his family to go to college and is a distinguished professor of history and a Fulbright Professor and Scholar in 2003 at the University of Tromsø in Norway. Bruce has written 10 plays. This might have changed since I've had this bio, because you'll see here in a moment. He's had 6 of those plays produced. He's written a comic book series called Snark and written many books, which includes Anzar the Progenitor and his latest release, We Are the Aliens, a case for alien-human integration. And if you've been following this podcast since the beginning, you would know that Bruce was one of our first guests that we had on the show way back at episode 7, and that was in June of 2021. So everybody, let's go ahead and bring him on, Dr. Bruce Solheim. Bruce, great to see you, man.
It's good to see you guys too. Thank you for inviting me back.
Yeah, it's been a while, man, and so much has gone on in the last 3.5 years or so.
Yeah,
and to say it's been interesting would be a huge understatement. But how have you been, and what do you make of the last 3 years and all of this craziness?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. We're doing okay. Family's doing okay. I got 2 grandsons and 4 children, and still married to Ginger. So that's, as long as I got that, I'm good. And I'm still working, so I'm teaching still. And I've been teaching strictly online, but I'm gonna go back to in the classroom partly because I want to, and partly because they're making it difficult for me not to. So, which is kind of a nationwide push. Anybody's been working online, they're all going back. That's, but anyway, I'm doing okay and doing a lot of writing, writing another textbook. I call them anti-textbooks because I hate textbooks, and so do students, by the way. I mean, that's, I think, a pretty well-known fact. And I like to write them in a very personal style. So I did one already for modern U.S. history. Now I'm doing one for early American history, and I'm going right into the lion's mouth with all the struggles on, when did our nation begin? Was it 1619? Was it 1776? I'm tackling all that stuff in my own unique way, in a very Norwegian way, because Norwegians are always in the middle of things, trying to, get people to listen to each other. And anyway, I think we need more of that. And there's, not that I don't have opinions, and sometimes very strong opinions, but, I try to be cordial to people, or as Thomas Jefferson said, every difference of opinion doesn't mean a difference in principles. So, you can have different opinions. But anyway, that's what I'm up to, just writing a lot. And this new book has been fun. I've talked to some people, and I've done a few, I think the 21st of June, going up to Santa Paula to a ghost and UFO kind of event at a haunted hotel. And Ginger and I are going to stay in a haunted room in the haunted hotel. So now I'm bringing all my things together in one. and I'm giving a talk there. So I'm hoping, I know I'll have some kind of ghost experience, because I just always do. And Ginger's saying, am I going to have it? And I said, well, I don't know. If you're with me, probably. Yeah. So we'll see.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be very interesting, because once you get pulled into this stuff and you start looking into it, it just doors keep on opening and things get weirder and weirder. And
that's true. That is true.
One of the weirder things that has happened since last you were on was the realm of UFOs and non-human intelligences has kind of made mainstream because of all the UFO talk in DC. And now there were the face peelers down in Peru, those encounters that the people down in the villages had. The one young lady, maybe getting abducted and got away with some injuries. And then there was the alien encounters in Las Vegas. And my opinion, it keeps going back and forth on these as to, what was going on. And now we have people, crime scene experts or forensics experts that come on and have said that the video is 100% legit. It hasn't been doctored in any way. And you can see that there are some shadows that are moving that are not being cast by the people with the cameras, and the reaction of the families of what they've seen, what they were seeing in their backyard, regardless of the bolide that was going through the sky. Something was going on. So I'm just curious, with those things in mind, what are your thoughts? What came to you as I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of people and, and we can talk a little bit more about your background and where you're at. But it had to feel a little bit of, see, I told you so kind of a thing. Maybe I don't know. What was your reaction?
Well, I understand a lot of people who've had experiences or even abductions, and have, had ghost experiences and paranormal experiences. They're all saying, a lot of them are probably saying, I told you so. And it's, the thing is, it's really my theory, and not just my theory, but there's physicists and scientists and other scientists who say the same thing, that, the paranormal and UFO, alien stuff, it's all in the same realm. It's not unusual that all this stuff is coming loose at the same time. It's like, the door is opened, and now you can't push it back, and it's just flooding at us all at the same time. And, but yeah, the alien world, the spirit world, and the quantum world are all really the same thing. That's how this stuff happens, as far as I can see. And I'm not, like I said, not the only one who thinks that. But what's interesting is you'll have all this sensational stuff, like David Grush gives his testimony. Senators are talking about NHIs. I mean, who could have predicted any of this? And then people are like, oh, okay, but how am I going to afford my rent next month? And how, so people are anticipating that they're just going to start their hairs on fire or whatever and start running around, and everybody's just going, well, yeah, this is really kind of interesting, but I got some real world issues I got to deal with too. So at the same time, because we got a lot of difficulties in not just our country, but worldwide, and conflict and everything else. So somehow you got to fit all that stuff, shoehorn that into your regular life. And so it's interesting that it's all happening at the same time now. And people also get a little jaded. It's like, okay, you tell us all this remarkable stuff. We have crash retrieval. We have all that. And then there's people sitting around going, I don't know, unless I see one on TV with the president, I'm not going to believe it. You got to show me, it's like they're all from Missouri or something. You got to show me all this stuff. I want to see it. I want to meet one. I want to have dinner or have a beer with one, whatever. That's what I want. I don't want to be abducted, but, I just want to meet with them and just, maybe have them over for dinner or whatever, if that's okay. And so I think it's hard to get everybody on board to understand exactly how significant it is when they have so many other concerns and worries. So I think that's partly what we're up against, people who are, doing your show like yourself, like you guys, or writing books or whatever. You're going to still have people pushing back and just, until it's right in front of them every day, it's going to be very difficult for them to accept. I think it was the late Jim Marrs who said the boggle factor. It's really tough to get past that. Even myself, things happen or I hear about things and I go, well, that's interesting, but I don't know, and then I have that natural skepticism, and I think it's good to have it. Otherwise you'll be so gullible, you'll believe everything. And that's
right.
So
well, it's like one of our listeners just said in chat, Guy, he was like our third person we ever interviewed on this podcast 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And he says, if the president tells me they exist, they being aliens, I'll stop believing in aliens.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so we live in an age of great skepticism because, and this idea of people not trusting in leadership, and they almost want to say that it's never happened before, but this has happened in the past. I'm a historian, my day job, so
yeah, you of all people would know that.
There is skepticism. There's always been, we don't trust our leaders. And as far as nasty politics, I mean, you can go back to the founding fathers, and they said terrible things about each other and their lineage or what. I mean, they just really got into it. And so that's nothing new. So it's always been rather dirty, down and dirty. But this is so important that I'm really hoping that people catch the significance of this, and from a spiritual sense too, because there's a definite spiritual element to this, and it doesn't have to be like a dividing line between the ghost people and the UFO people, because like I said, it's the same realm. And a lot of these experiences, I've heard people say, well, every paranormal experience you've had, every ghost experience, it was probably a UFO or an alien experience. And I'm thinking, well, maybe, but I think you can have both. And sometimes I've had an incident where it was both. It was, there was one part of it that started off as a kind of it's actually kind of a demonic experience. And then there was an alien intervention that came as part of it. So they like piggybacked. And then I had in my memory, my conscious memory, it was all messed up. I only saw it in one perspective. And when I really broke into it, I saw, it's not mutually exclusive. Both things were going on. So, and that's extremely complicated for people. If you tell them, okay, I believe in UFOs, or okay, I believe in ghosts, but now you're telling me they could both show up at the same time, or
Bigfoot,
or Bigfoot, yeah, all that, That reminds me of that great joke by the I always forget his name, Mitch Hedberg, I think his name was.
Yes. Yep.
Remember that guy? He had that funny routine about Bigfoot. He said, "Why is it? It's always the film footage is always blurry." Of course, you could say the same for UFOs too. And he said, "Well, maybe it's because Bigfoot is blurry. Maybe he is blurry." And
Right.
and of course, that hints at the idea of interdimensionality, which is what we're talking about with UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, all that stuff. Because when they're not phased in or phased out totally, they're in an inner, kind of that inner space, and they're going to look fuzzy. And it's, anyway. So it's just, it always reminds me of that joke that he told. There's a lot of truth to that joke.
Yeah, I always compared him to like Stephen Wright. Stephen Wright was the very melancholy, depressed comic standing up there with the weird afro, and he would one of his favorite lines was, "I lost my button hole." Everybody loses a button, but he lost a buttonhole. Everything he did was very cerebral and made you think.
Yeah. And then when you really think about it, you think, have you ever been buttoning your shirt and you go, wait a second, where's the buttonhole? Oh, I had it all wrong. I was all, doing it wrong or something.
Yeah. And then he would say something along the lines of, there's powdered milk, but what do you add to powdered water?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, he would just come up with these things and just, blow your minds with that. All right.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had here for you, and maybe since it was such a long time since you were on before when we talked about Anzar and the progenitor in your book that you released, and maybe people just are not familiar with you on our show. They haven't listened to this episode. So would you mind filling people in on who or what is Anzar in your relationship with this being?
Yeah.
And, can you give us a little bit of the background for our new listeners and this new format that we're doing?
Sure. Yeah. I'll start by saying I've been having paranormal or alien experiences since I was 4 or 5 years old. So this has been ongoing. They were very frequent but random. My mother was a psychic, so already you got some spooky elements to it. And I've had everything from ghost experiences, demonic experiences, alien abduction, telepathy, telekinesis, you name it. Bigfoot, I had Bigfoot too, experience. So I've had all these things, kind of a lightning rod. And it wasn't until 2016 that I a friend of mine died and came to me in a vision and said, "Hey, you can't keep this to yourself anymore. You got to start publishing. You've been publishing books, but you haven't published any stories about what has happened to you." And I was arguing with my friend Gene. He was the one who came to me a month after he died. And I said, I'll lose my job. And he said, no, the timing is right. This was 2016 that he came to me. So that's right about the time that all this started really coming, shaking loose. And he said, don't worry about it. And you can, he explained what it was like being where he is, beyond this life. And he said the best word for it is timeless. And he said that's what you should call your books, timeless. So I did. I wrote 3 books, but I was still nervous about losing my job or whatever credibility. So the first one I just stuck with ghost stories. Second one a little bit more, and the third one I started talking about Anzar, and or this figure called the progenitor, because that's how I knew him at first. And then in the fourth one, I wrote about Anzar. So who is Anzar? Anzar has been with me since he's in the modern parlance, I guess you'd say an NHI, non-human intelligence. He doesn't like to be called an alien because that's how I start this new book. I said, who wants to be called an alien? And when I was asking him, I said, can I call you an alien? Are you an alien? He said, look it up. And I looked it up in the dictionary, and I saw every definition of it was not good. I mean, it's not nice. It's bad. Who wants to be called an alien? So I said, well, what do you want to be called? And he said, star family, because we are related. We are all related. And so anyway, my experience with him is that it goes back to when I had a healing experience in northern Norway in 1963. People thought my parents thought I was going to die, and I was healed miraculously. And so it goes back to that. It goes back to 1964 in my backyard. He saved me from a child predator. And all this stuff I just kind of tucked away, and I didn't know it was exactly an alien intervention or anything. I just knew there was some mystical thing that happened, and it was kind of buried deep within me. And then I had all these paranormal experiences, ghost sightings, all these other things I mentioned. And then in 1997, he appeared to me in a vision. And when I say vision, I'm not sleeping and I'm not like fully awake like I am now, but I'm in a meditative state. And he came to me, and I could see him clearly, and he had kind of a proto-human look to him, and he was revolving in space. And he said, "I am the progenitor." And he proceeded to tell me all this stuff about how the origins of the universe and how things are connected. And it was very Zen-like, It was very interesting. I wrote down everything he said. I drew a picture of him, but then I kept it to myself, and I didn't do anything with it until I think it was 2001. I went up to one of my colleagues at the school where I teach, Citrus College in Glendora, California. And I went up to her, and she was an anthropologist. She was into ancient religions, and she's an interesting lady. So I thought, she's open-minded, I can tell her. So I showed her the picture. I told her about the progenitor. She's looking at it, looking at me, looking at it. And then she looked back at me and she said, "You're a pretty spacey dude, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And then I said, "Never mind, we don't have to talk about it." She said, "Okay, I got to grade some papers." So I got scared off, and I said, "Okay, I'm not going to, if I can't talk to her about it, who am I going to talk to?" And so it wasn't until, I said with Gene, that I started exploring it openly and started publishing and talking on radio shows and talking to everybody. And I even started teaching a paranormal class at my school. So I just let it all hang out. And I've come to find out that he wasn't just the progenitor. He's Anzar the progenitor. That's his name. He is connected to me. In fact, part of, as he said, I'll put it in his words, an aspect of you is an aspect of me. That's what he told me. So we are related. And beyond all that, he was serious when he said we are star family, that we are all related, that we were seeded here, and super, what do they call it? Not through slow evolution, but there was, kind of like CRISPR technology that we have now. It's very compared to what they have done, but that's similar, this idea of genetic manipulation. And he said that's why he calls himself the progenitor, that he was among others who did this, and we are all related to one another. And that's why I call this book "We Are the Aliens." And also I asked my friend Gene once again. I said, "Gene," I said, "who are the aliens?" Because I like to talk to him. I like to talk to Anzar. And when I do it, by the way, I'm in a meditative state, usually what I call a spirit walk. I go out and walk in a very special place near my home, and I get into a meditative state, and I record everything I'm saying, everything I hear and see. And I asked Gene, I said, "who are the aliens?" And he said, "Bruce, we are the aliens." Do you get it? We are the aliens. And that's, of course, what Anzar had told me as well. So that's kind of the premise of the book, and this process of integration, which is what we're going through right now since 2017 or so, is slowly realizing that these are our star family. And it's hard for a lot of people to accept. It's hard for people to accept that all human beings, are related too, because we're so busy divided, being divided. It's like, oh, you're this color, you're that color, you're this religion, you're that religion, when we're all one big family, one big star family, actually. So, and Native Americans and Aborigines and indigenous people, they knew all this already. That's why they use those terms: star people, the star family. And so that's very common to them. And the other thing I'm being told is that, and I'm actually being reminded right now, is that that's the only way we're going to survive, is to make this evolutionary leap, this leap of consciousness, because otherwise, we're not going to make it. we have to realize how we fit into the larger picture of the cosmos, not just in our little divided, tribalized groups, and we have too much power at our fingertips to allow that to be that risky, and they will intervene on occasion, as you've heard all the stories and all your listeners have, like Bob Salas, the missile control officer, Air Force missile control officer up in Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, where they shut down the nukes after a UFO sighting. And he's a friend of mine, and he's talked to me about it. And I've actually asked for his help with my son, which is another thing we can talk about, but who's also in the Air Force and has had some experiences. But anyway, that's kind of who Anzar is, and I talk to him on a regular basis, several times a month, and during these spirit walks. So he's there with me, and we're together, integrated.
Now, is it possible that this is? You mentioned the word demon earlier, and
Yes.
I don't mean in a negative way. I'm thinking more of the Greek, like DAI or DAEMON, a daemon.
Yeah, daemon.
Yeah. Could this be like, is he your daemon, your subconscious working out complex problems and creative muse type of a thing? Just throwing it out there from a skeptical point of view, because I'm sure you've had people, very skeptical with you. And when you explain that to me, it sounds like the definition of what the Greeks called a daemon.
Well, that's why I'm very careful to, that subtitle of the book, we are the aliens, alien human integration. So we are together. So whether you describe it that way, or as, we're not completely separate entities. That's the thing.
Right.
And he exists both in the past and in the future and now, which is what the quantum realm is. And that we tend to think only in this interface that we have in this, but if you get into the quantum world, you realize that we are simultaneously experiencing all these timelines, and but it's an interesting question in many ways, because it could bring up some of the, I'll just bring up what my what my own wife Ginger said. She said early on, when I was telling her about my experiences and writing it down and writing these books, she said, "Now, are you sure you're just not out there talking to yourself?" And it was a good question. It was a legitimate question. And I said, that's a very good question. But I have to tell you, some of the things he's told me is beyond what I could know. And it's like when you do, contact a spirit from somebody's dead relative, and they tell you something that only they would know, or the loved one would know. And then I relate that to the grieving person, and they go, "Oh my gosh, how did you know that?" And I said, "I didn't know it. They told me." I'm not taking credit for it at all. I'm just, like a conduit, and sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong, because there's also interpretation problems. There's or translation problems. There's also, in remote viewing, they call it analytical overlay, where you intrude upon the signal line, which is the true connection, right, to the other world, to put it, just kind of in a very simplistic way. And it's not always tuned in just right. So you might hear it wrong, or you might, oh, this is what I think they're saying, rather than knowing what they're saying and just taking it in pure form and just relaying that. You start saying, well, I'm going to edit this a little. I'm going to self-edit a little bit. And it's always, when you start doing that, it's always wrong. It gets messed up. You just have to take a chance and say, this is what I felt and heard and saw, and leave it at that. Don't try to.
That could be an unconscious thing too, couldn't it?
Yeah.
It could be your own brain just trying to make sense of what it is that you're picking up.
It's natural, because sometimes it's just it's so far-fetched, that it's sometimes, based on our everyday reality interface, it just, you wait a second, no, that can't be right. And your skepticism kind of enters in, and you don't want to be seen as foolish, so you're going to say, well, I don't think I should say that, and and sometimes it's a good thing, because I've made spirit connections where they've told me something, and they said, well, don't tell my loved one. And I have to respect that. Even if the loved one asks, I have to respect the person who's passed on, because, I feel an obligation to both of them, but I don't take money to ever do any,
like channeling or something along those lines.
Somebody asked me to connect with their uncle or something that passed away. I just do it out of the kindness of my heart, because I want to help them. And I don't do it very often. I do it for myself, talk to, spirits, but, because I don't want to get into that situation where I tell them what they want to hear, or that I think is right, or I start picking up on nonverbal cues, like in a carnival or something. I don't want to do any of that stuff. I don't want to do a carnival sideshow. I just want to help people and help myself and help all of us. I mean, that's this idea that, I have with these books, is that I hope there's helpful stuff in there that I've learned. But it's a very good question. It's a deep probing question, and it's a combination of things you get as you learn. You get the resources that you have, then you have the connection to the signal line, and you put it all together, and then you present that. So there is a combination of all of these things, and we are much more powerful beings than we think we are, or that our leaders would like us to believe. They would like us to believe that we're like ants that are being told what to do and just follow orders. And pretty soon, if your consciousness expands enough, then you realize, no, I'm not. I'm much more powerful than that. And I don't mean powerful like in a traditional sense, but like much more intuitive and natural as a human being, as an integrated human being, that we have ESP. We all have this. It's just some people cultivate it more than others. Some people accept it more than others. So,
or some people have an experience that can kind of turn things on too.
Yes, there is a switch that flips when you have, as my friend Gene says, experiencing is believing, and believing is experiencing. As you said, it just opens up a door to the next thing, and it just gets more mind expanding, without, I'm not talking about like pharmaceutically mind expanding. That's a whole other topic, but it's related in a way. But I don't use any pharmaceuticals. I don't even drink alcohol. So I feel like I have enough going on without trying to, stimulate it much more than it is. Because, and that's another thing I always like to say, it kind of as a PSA. If whoever is interested in this kind of stuff, the first thing you need to do is protect yourself, because there's a lot of bad entities out there, and I've had bad experiences. So you have to use whatever tradition you have or whatever means you have to protect yourself. And I mean psychically protect yourself as well as physically, but because I've been physically assaulted by entities as well. And then you need to know how to turn it off, because once you turn it on, it's going to be much easier the second time, the third time, whatever. It just gets much easier. You can just like that. But you got to know how to turn it off, because it's not always appropriate to be hearing or seeing things around you when you're in certain social situations. And, like you're at the drugstore getting your prescription, you go, tell the druggist, oh, hang on just a minute. There's a ghost here that wants to talk to me. Yes, Mr. Smith. What would you, yeah, they might be there, but you're just going to have to turn it off until you get out of that situation. Otherwise, you could get into some serious trouble, and the people in the white truck with the white coats come out, And,
well, and we've had sensitive people, intuits and psychics on the show. Actually, we're going to have one on again next Sunday for our next show. And I believe it was Gemma that was talking about, once these things kind of open up to you, or that you are born and you have, you have these innate sensitivities, you kind of stand out to these things.
Oh yes, definitely.
Like a beacon. And even though you can't pick up on some of them and they can hide themselves from you or whatever, these things can see you all the time.
Yes, they can. And the word you use, beacon, is a very good word. Whitley Strieber says that certain people they can see your glow. They can see this luminosity about you. And it's like any entity is going to want to follow the path of least resistance to communicate. You don't want to go the hard route. You don't want to they don't want to spend all their energy trying to get down to a lower frequency or whatever to concentrate on somebody who's not going to even communicate with them, doesn't want to accept it, doesn't have maybe some natural things that they're enhancing or what they're blocking it, right? In other words, you want to go to the people that naturally they have that glow, they have the beacon. Go to them, and that's the path of least resistance, because we have to work very hard to reach them, and they have to work hard to reach us. Now, some of them are much more talented than others and can reach us much easier. But like my friend Gene, we have we had a personal connection. We were friends since we were little kids, so it's much easier for us. Ansar's been with me my whole life, so that's easier. Plus, he's an entity that's been around for a very long time. So, but yeah, the word beacon is very appropriate. And it's and it is happening all the time, and you just have to learn to turn it off, especially in social situations when it's just not appropriate. This in the military we call it situational awareness. Know where you're at and what you're supposed to be doing and how to conduct yourself and be careful, but I've had some terrible experiences, that's why I said to be sure you can protect yourself. And, if somebody tells me, for instance, just, yes, there's that barn over there and there's a demon in there. We think you should go in there and communicate with it. I'll go, I believe you. I don't have to go in there I know they're real. And I don't want to go in there.
That's like somebody with a plate of food.
Yeah.
They take a bite of food and they go, "Ugh, this is disgusting. Here, try it."
Yeah. See what you think.
You don't need my validation.
No. I believe you. I totally believe you, man. Yeah, I'm with you.
Hey, misery loves company, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's very important to protect yourself. And as far as, aliens and UFOs and all that stuff, some people are very frightened and have had very negative experiences, and I don't blame them. I'm sure they did. It's two different things can happen, or the same thing could happen, very similar thing could happen to two different people, and they could take it totally different. I've had some traumatizing experience. In fact, when I got rescued from a child predator by ANZAR, yes, it's saved me in many ways, and I'm very thankful for it. But it was so traumatic, and not so much the child predator part of it, because he never did anything to me, thank God. But unfortunately, he was doing this to other children. But the experience was so traumatic that I couldn't speak properly for 2 years. I had to go to speech therapy. So when I was 6 years old, when this happened, I had to be suddenly I was stuttering and stammering, and then I just gave up talking altogether, because of course that's what happens to kids. You stutter and you stammer and people make fun of you. So then you stop talking, and then it just gets worse. It kind of snowballs. Being educators, you guys, I'm sure have encountered these kids who have, speech impediments and so forth. So, and one of the reasons people get sudden onset of this is from traumatic experiences. And that's exactly what happened to me. So, but after 2 years, and luckily they diagnosed it properly and they sent me to a speech therapist, I was able to work through it. But at that time, I could never imagine being someone who talks for a living, a teacher or whatever. That would be the furthest thing from what I would think I'd be doing. But, it was a temporary effect. Other people have, burns, or they have marks, or there's all kinds of things. And almost everybody has the psychological thing. I did the organization CERO, Close Encounter Resource Organization, headed by Yvonne Smith. She's been around for 30 whatever years, knew all the biggies, Bud Hopkins and, John Mack and everybody. And anyway, she, now I lost my point I was trying to make. Oh, I did a survey of CERO members, both here in the United States and in France. I set up a survey, and it was based on the VA, because I'm a veteran. I get my health care at the VA in Long Beach. And I used their PSL checklist, which is the checklist they use to determine a provisional diagnosis for PTSD. and it's based on the DSM-5 and all that stuff. So it's
Yep.
all medically
Mhm.
sound. And I took that and I made a couple revisions to make it appropriate. Instead of saying in combat or in a military situation, instead it was contact with an alien being or any kind of abduction kind of experience. And what I found out was that 46% of the survey takers who were part of CERO could get a provisional PTSD diagnosis from the VA according to their own checklist. And and there's like trick questions in there for people that are lying, so they can determine if it's
Sure.
appropriate or not. And so I think that's rather telling. That means these people are not lying. They've had experience. And I talked to guys. A friend of mine was a director of the Veterans Center in East LA, and his name was Manny. And I said, Manny, is it possible to fake PTSD? And he said, ultimately, no, you can't fake PTSD. You could say you have PTSD, but as soon as a therapist talks to you or people talk, they know it's not real. If you're around other people with PTSD who've had traumatic experiences, you get attracted to each other. It's like this person has been traumatized. Combat veterans do that all the time. They'll see a combat veteran across the way. Oh, that guy's been in war. I can tell. The 1,000-yard stare. I think it's the same with people who've had experiences with abduction or with very traumatic paranormal experiences. You can kind of tell. You get attracted to those people because you can trust each other. It's like, hey, you know what it's like. Yeah, I know what it's like. You don't have to explain it to me. I understand. And so anyway, I just it was fun to do that survey. I'm hoping somebody can pick up there and do a more expansive survey, because I think we really need one to make it even more acceptable and get people to take that evolutionary leap that we need to take.
Well, we just had Jackie and Bill Kosolis on talking about Mothman and their new book, and they are literally examining and doing a study, like you're saying right now, about people dealing with traumatic, paranormal, and UFO experiences.
Yeah.
And after we had them on the show, Bill contacted me and was interested in Michelle and I actually doing part of their survey too. So I think it's getting out there with the light that's been shined on this now. It's getting out there that there are people, I don't want to say I was traumatized from the triangle that Michelle and I dealt with, the black triangle that night, but physically it affected me and basically cooked my thyroid, which basically, turned me into a hyperthyroid machine that now has to take meds to keep my thyroid from going to overload and making me drop dead because I have hyperthyroidism now. And usually it is so rare in men and even women that, it's usually hypothyroid.
Right.
And I never had any issues until it was about 5 months or so after we had that experience.
Right.
And
were you beneath it or as you were beneath it, right?
Yeah,
okay,
we drove underneath it as we went on the expressway.
So what now, physicists like somebody like Jack Sarfati, I don't know if he's ever been on your show. He's an interesting guy. He's kind of a loose cannon, but he's a great guy. He's from Brooklyn, and he's an older guy and he just says whatever he wants. But anyway, he's a physicist, quantum physicist, and he talks about the effects of blue shift, and if you're underneath a hovering UFO, especially a large one, which is the triangular ones are the biggies, you're going to get that blue shift ionizing radiation, which is going to impact, it would impact the thyroid. It would impact your cellular structure. It would have an impact, a physical impact on you. If it's I think if it's approaching you, it's the red shift. So that's not going to hurt you. But if you're under it or right as it's going away from you, that's when you're in the trouble, the danger zone of that blue shift, what he calls blue shift. And I'm not an expert on, I'm not a physicist, but anyway, it makes sense to me that would be a physical manifestation that you would have from that. And from that, of course, once you tie that together, then of course there would be possibly the psychological connection as well that you may or may not be aware of, that might, and I'm not wishing this on you, but the idea that someday because you might say, wow, okay, that was even more traumatic than I thought. And that happens to people. I know a lot of veterans, I'm a veteran myself, and a lot of them, they go through combat, they go through their experiences, and then later they go, oh, wow, that's starting to really, I'm thinking about it in a different way now. And that's just a natural, you want to protect yourself. So you don't want to go down that road, but until you realize, wait a second, okay, yeah, I think I need to deal with this now. And an example of that would be, you remember the Band of Brothers TV series? They had, one of the coolest things is they had the actual guys at the beginning of every episode. And you saw these tough old guys, and they're like in tears and they're acting like it just happened yesterday. Because to them, they are now ready to talk about it. They've been holding on to this stuff for 60 years, And my mom and dad were the same way. They lived through World War II. They did not want to show anybody their emotions about this. And they had lost a child during World War II. The Nazis took my dad to a camp. They took over part of their house. I mean, it was horrible. Their whole country was occupied, and people died and were put in prison, and it was terrible. But they talked about it, but they talked about it in a kind of a dispassionate way, And then later in life, it really started impacting my father. I'm not wishing that on you. I'm just saying that there might be a psychological impact that is there, and you just have to be aware of that. And I'm not a shrink, so don't take anything I'm saying.
No. No, I understand.
And like you, obviously physically experienced. Yeah.
Right. And like you, I'm also an Army vet. I was in the Army. I was with the 101st Airborne, and then
you were Screaming Eagles.
Okay. Screaming Eagles. Yep. Dopes on ropes. So we did some crazy stuff, and then I went to the 82nd. I was infantry, and my job was heavy weapons anti-tank. Mm-hmm. And I was 11 Hotel, but I was 11 Bravo. I was a knuckle dragger, and that was my thing. And did some crazy stuff that kind of hardened my brain in certain ways.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, when I saw this craft, first I thought it was a airliner crashing. We're not that far from Detroit Metro Airport.
Right.
And then as we got closer, I was like, well, we're going to die,
Mm-hmm.
and that's been a realization I've had since I was a kid, that I was probably going to die in a war. I mean, that was my thing, that I don't have no fear of death. And Michelle's
Mm-hmm.
like, what the hell is that thing? And I'm like, we're going to die. It's going to crash right on top of us. It's over. And then as we got closer, it was a, this black triangle, and we get closer and closer. And then I hear the voice, and the voice was, get away. You don't belong here. Get away. And then instant terror. I mean, instant, nothing I ever felt before. It felt alien, to use that term. Like, I don't know whose voice that was. I don't know what, but it came with emotion. It was like emotional language. And it hit me, and I couldn't get my Jeep going fast enough to get us out of there. And then it kind of moved parallel along the expressway where we were driving. We lost sight of it. And then when we got back to where we could see it a couple seconds later, where it should have been, it was gone. And then a few months later, I started with the thyroid issues. I thought I was losing my mind. My thyroid was so dialed up. It was,
wow.
It was insane. And
so, what's really interesting?
That started this whole thing, by the way. That's why we started this, to get people to come on and tell their story. What did they see? get it off your chest. You'll feel better.
Yes.
And, and this is where we're at now 4 years later.
I think it's good for everybody to do that. That's why I did it. I'm glad Gene came to me and told me to just start telling it like it is. And, you guys are kind of like you didn't have the abduction part of it, but, you're kind of the Betty and Barney Hill of, of the more modern times. But what's interesting, and this is according to Yvonne Smith, is that whenever there's a dual experience, oftentimes, especially with abductions, oftentimes it breaks people up. I am so glad that you guys are both on board with each other and doing this together, and it's a project you do together. I think that's really admirable, because it's not easy.
No.
As Yvonne says, that almost every couple or friend, and when it's two friends like Terry Lovelace and his friend, they broke up their friendship because of their abduction experience. My friendship with my friend Ernie from 1977, his abduction, where I was witnessing it, that broke up our friendship. And it's terrible. But you guys, like Betty and Barney Hill, have stuck together and stuck to your guns, and you're doing a service. And I'm not just saying this to shine you on. You're doing a service for people. You're doing a great noble service, like your military experience. And I know both of your teachers too. So that is a noble service as well. So you're doing double duty in addition to your previous military duty to help people. And as we transition into this brave new world, to steal a title.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I'm not going to say it hasn't caused rifts. I mean, with Michelle's side of the family, they are very much, oh, you guys have seen a UFO? Well, let me tell you about what happened with blank. And let me tell you, and come to find out, people in her family are like, oh yeah, we've seen some things. Check it out. Then on my side of the family, it's like, oh, you're on drugs. You're crazy. And that was the last I've heard of them. And it's like, oh, well, okay, I guess so.
Yeah. And that happens to people. Yeah. It's sad.
It does. But I'm at a point in my life where I really, I don't really care. I'm with the person I'm supposed to be with. We're in the same profession. We have the same talks every night. We've been married now 7 years, and it's like, we know, with our profession and then what happened to us. And when we do this, it just seems like everything was put into alignment so that we would end up at this place. Even me as a scientist. I mean, I'm a scientist. I teach Earth and space science, and it's just really weird how all of these things seem to work out. And, we never thought we would be doing something like this. And yet here we are.
I know. I feel the same way too. I gotta wait a second. I'm on a national show or whatever, or writing these books about this stuff, and you do have people who will viciously come after you, and a lot of it's because they're afraid, or maybe they're so religious and so narrow-minded that they think, oh, everything's got to be demonic, in a negative sense, a very pejorative sense. And I tell them, I said, well, I've been very careful about Anzar. He always tells me every time I communicate with him to keep love in my heart and operate from a position of love. Now, a demon wouldn't say that. Now, a demon might say that to try to fool you and then reel you in, and then do something bad. But that's never happened. It's been going on for a very long time, and it's always the same message. It's trying to be helpful, good advice, some, preparations for the future, that type of stuff, and insights. And so it's, I've enjoyed the experience, although it's not easy to get criticism. As all of us know, you get 100 attaboys, you get one, somebody just tearing you apart, and you don't remember all the 100 attaboys. It's always that one. Even though that person might be just very sick or mean-spirited or totally misunderstand, you still are trying to, why couldn't I reach that person? You can't reach everybody, it's I'll share something that my friend David, he passed away. He's a Vietnam vet. He died a couple of years ago. I talked to him too, and he's kind of my writing mentor. He was a tremendous writer, very accomplished writer and poet. He told me the other day, just kind of whispered it, from beyond, he said, talk to the living. You'll have plenty of time to talk to us later.
Right.
And I thought,
Right.
wow, that's really good. So part of what we're doing is we're talking to the living. We're talking to, people. We also, I have communication with others, but this is very important. What you do is very important. What I do is important, not just the teaching, but this aspect of it too. And I just think it's cool that you guys are doing it together.
Yeah, it's we saw it together. We started asking questions together, and we kind of
Still trying to figure it out together.
yeah.
That's
So,
good. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Before we go any further, and I have some more questions here, but Aaron's Energy, one of our loyal listeners, asked this question. What does Bruce know about experiencers and the RH negative connection? And then just as a side note, Michelle is RH negative.
Yeah. So am I.
Okay.
I'm A negative. My mom was O negative. And this is interesting. Okay. So the highest percentage of RH, and just for people who may not know, you're a science person, so obviously but a lot of people may not be familiar. That RH comes from rhesus monkey. So positive. About 85% of the people, if I'm not mistaken, 85% of the people in the world are RH positive blood type, and about 15% are RH negative. So I'm one of the 15%. My mom was too. And then you look at A negatives, and that's about 6% of the people on Earth. And there tends to be people with RH negative blood tend to have more experiences than others. And I know scientists and medical people have tried to explain, they say, well, it's just a mutation, it's nothing to it, whatever. I think it's more than that. But this is interesting. The people in the Basque region of Spain have about 35% of them have RH negative blood. And the other highest concentration, even higher, it's at 40%, is the Amazigh people of Morocco, the Berbers in North Africa. And what's interesting, this is where it really gets interesting. A guy contacted me who, I don't think he's Amazigh, but he studies them and he lives in Holland. And he said, did you realize that Anzar is their chief rain god? They worship Anzar. And I said, well, I had heard about that, but I'm not an expert on Amazigh or Berber culture. And so he was just fascinated with that. He said, how'd you come up with the name Anzar? And I said, I didn't. That's what he told me his name was. And so so 40% of those people and 35% in the Basque region. And there's a connection because where did Spain got conquered by the Moors? Where did the Moors come from? They came from Morocco. They came from North Africa. So it's kind of interesting that there's that connection. And then I'm not an expert on Atlantis, but a lot of people said that, the lost continent of Atlantis is tied to the Twin Pillars, which is outside of North Africa and the Mediterranean.
Right.
That area. So it's kind of interesting. And I've asked Anzar, I said, are you, being worshipped by the Amazigh? And he said, well, yeah, that's me. And I said, well, do you consider yourself a god? And he goes, no. So, he's not telling me he's a god or anything. He just said, well, yeah, that's who I am. I said, okay, well, that's interesting. But anyway, so yes, I think there's a connection. I think that's something that has not been revealed to everybody, is that there is something rather unique. Not to say that RH positive people can't have experiences, because they do, and they have. I know a lot of people who have. But there seems to be some kind of even stronger alien connection or paranormal connection, are making it easier for people with RH negative blood. And there's other differences between people with RH negative blood and RH positive that I can't remember. I read something about it, but anyway, those are some of my findings. So yes, that's a long answer to the short answer is yes, there is something rather unique about it and tied into all this. How exactly it's tied in, I only have bits and pieces of information. So, as most of us do, we all have
Right.
puzzle pieces, trying to feverishly try to put this picture together.
Well, I think that's probably one of the reasons why so many people have been feeling compelled to write books and talk and have shows like this and things like that. Is there seems to be some type of a underlying consciousness that is trying to put all of those puzzle pieces out there for people.
Yes.
And it's going to take one smart person to kind of put them all together.
Yes.
And yeah, well, one thing I did want to put up here, I had it up earlier. Terry Lovelace, his friend was Toby, and his connection was he was from Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah,
and I think he eventually ended up passing away too.
He did. He passed away a number of years ago, and I contacted him. I think Toby might be the name that Terry gave him. I don't think that was his real name because he didn't want to use his real name, but he told me his real name. So I made a contact with him, and I said, I just want to pass on a message from Terry. And I did talk to him in the spirit world, and I said, is there anything you want me to tell Terry that, and something like proof of life beyond, this life or whatever. And he meant, I'll just call him Toby. Toby said, yeah, tell him about that knife I gave him, that special knife. He'll know what I mean. And I, so I said, okay. And when I talked to Terry, I said, yeah, I got a hold of Toby, and he told me to tell you about this special knife that he gave you that you really like. And he said, oh my God, yeah, he gave me this. It's like a rigger's knife or something, some kind of special knife. I think you've probably encountered one in the Airborne, the rigger's knife, it's a special one used for, I don't know, parachute riggers or people in rappelling or in, airborne, air assault or airborne. Right. So, and it was a very special, unique knife that he gave him. And Terry goes, that's pretty cool. And there were some other personal things that he told me too, but that was I thought was pretty cool that I could share. But yeah, I had forgotten that he was from Flint, and yeah, that's pretty cool.
All right, well, let's move on here because I want to start digging into your book a little bit, and I was reading some pages online through Amazon, which everybody, if you go into the show description or you look at the tagged comment in the chat, you will see that there is a link to Bruce's book in Amazon. So go ahead and click on that and order it up and show your support. But we just had Ray Szymanski on the podcast last week, and he claims this will, that was his last media appearance for the foreseeable future, but there's always something that'll hook him and bring him back. I think he says this every time he's been on our show, and it's been like 4 times now. But he worked at Wright-Pat.
Yes, he did.
And and for people that are not sure what we're talking about, that's where the fabled Hangar 18 was located, and that's where the Roswell debris from the UFO crash retrieval in 1947, at least some of it, and possibly the occupants, were taken to Wright-Patterson. But now we were talking a little bit before the show, and Ray really spilled the beans on what was going on and possible intel influence and things that canceled the conference that was supposed to happen and things going on. And you brought up that you have a connection to Wright-Pat, and just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
And you were going to be a speaker too, as well, at that conference.
I was scheduled to speak at the Hangar 18 conference on September 21st or 22nd, but it was right around that time period. 20th to the 22nd, I think, was the conference. And it was going to be on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which had been the first time ever. And like you said, it has the connection that if your readers have read Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, he details about some of the materials going to Wright-Patterson where they were held, and alien bodies and all kinds of stuff is going on there. So they were going to have this conference, and I was invited to be a speaker. I told Ray about my experience with my son, which I'll go into in just a minute. And Ray said, you got to be kind of careful. What, we're on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, so maybe you shouldn't really say too much about that, and I said, okay, I was going to talk about it anyway, but I like Ray, he's a friend of mine. So I was trying to respect his wishes, but now it doesn't matter. But, so my son, my eldest son, he is in the Air Force Reserve. He's been in the Air Force over 20 years. He's a master sergeant in the security forces. He has a very high security clearance. He also, as his day job, his civilian job, he works for the Department of the Air Force as a contractor at the Air Force Research Laboratory, which is the same laboratory that Ray Szymanski worked at before he retired. And that's in Area B, which is the super secret part of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where Hangar 18 actually was, where the crash retrieval materials were and likely still are located. And I ask my son all the time, I say, what is it you're working on over there? And he said, Dad, I can't tell you. I'd like to tell you, but I can't. But he has told me that he works with scientists and engineers on, black box projects. And there's an airfield there that is not, doesn't have a, it's not a official airfield for anybody. It's a secret airfield, and people are, there's like black ops things going on there all the time. He's had night vision goggles and seen things coming and going. So anyway, it's a very interesting job that he has. And in January of last year, January 2023, my son and several other people in his unit got sick at the same time overnight. I mean, they just became terribly ill, where they all ended up in the ER. Well, as it turned out, there were 12 other people from the base that were all at the ER with similar symptoms. They were completely, like, they couldn't think straight. They were like completely fuzzy with their thinking. They had heart palpitations. They had numbness in all their limbs and had trouble with their muscle control. And they went into the Air Force hospital there at Wright-Pat, and all of them had this similar stuff going on. And my son is still not well. He's better and he's back at work, but for a long time he wasn't at work. Well, I suspected when he told me this that there was some kind of, at first I thought maybe it was a toxic spill or something happened, because it just sounded too like they couldn't all get some kind of mystery virus at the same time, with all these weird symptoms. Or I said it could have been a radiological release. And I said, well, you should get tested for radiation exposure and all that. They wouldn't do it. They did all these other tests, and they said, well, there's something wrong with your heart. You have some kind of or some kind of, the nerves in the heart. There's something wrong. They called it like an amalgam or something. I don't know what it was.
Arrhythmia?
Yeah, he had an arrhythmia too. But there was something. Yes, okay. So it was not working right. But he had no problems before this. It just suddenly happened, which is not usually the way that progresses. And so I told him, you demand to be tested. I mean, you're just a part-time airman. You can, as a civilian, you have every right to be tested. And he's had nothing but stonewalling by the Air Force to help him. And so finally I said, I'm going to write to members of Congress about this, because I asked Anzar, because Anzar provides me with intel, and I asked Anzar, I said, what has happened to my son and these other people? And he said, well, look at the timeline there. That was about the time that Congress was starting behind the scenes they hadn't done the big thing in public yet, but they were going after these defense contractors to try to find these materials, because David Grush had already given them the secret briefing in a skiff, So they were on to what was going on, and they wanted to find out. Well, Wright-Patterson is one of the repositories. Over there in Groom Lake and Area 51 is another. Up in Palmdale, Edwards Air Force Base is another, among others. So they they what Anzar said is they started to do rapidly try to do reverse engineering, and then they were going to move the materials to kind of play a cat and mouse or a shell game with members of Congress. So if they showed up, they could, oh, we don't have anything. And they got a little careless, and there was a release of ionizing radiation. That's what he said. So I asked that's why I asked my son, get tested for radiation exposure, and the sooner the better. And he was met with all this resistance. So I wrote to members of Congress. I wrote to all the members of the UAP committee, all of the senators and members of Congress. I wrote to my own member of Congress. Nothing, no response at all, just nothing. And that went on. And then in August 1st, I was in Toledo at a hotel with my wife, Ginger, and we were visiting my second eldest son, who's an engineer in Toledo in the auto industry. And then we were going to go down to Wright-Patterson, down to Dayton to be with my older son. Well, I was going to be on the Jimmy Church show that night. And somebody broke into our hotel room in the middle of the night. And my wife woke me up and said, there's somebody in our room. And you're a military guy. I went into my combat G.I. Joe mode, and I got up and I ran towards the door. The door closed. I opened up the door and I was like ready to just do, damage or whatever I had to do. I mean, I was in my pajamas, and there was a dude in like a highway construction outfit with the helmet and the red or the orange vest and everything. He was like, oh, I'm sorry. And he hadn't broken into the door. He must have had a key or something, because he just was in the door, and that's why it woke my wife up. And I was in a dead sleep at the time. So I was kind of like in shock. I was like, he's so nice. He just said, oh, I'm sorry. And then all of a sudden, the door on the other side of the hallway opens up, and there's other construction workers in there, similar dress. And they said, oh, hey, Joe, come on in. And so he quickly moves across, the door closes. Now, why didn't I go down? Why didn't I call the police? Why didn't I call the hotel manager at least? I was like in a stupor, and I said, oh, okay. And then I went back, and my wife and I said, oh, that was weird. And then we went to sleep. It was like weird. It's like we're on narcotics or something, The next morning I woke up and I go, I got to go talk to somebody. And I went down and talked to the front desk, and I said, somebody was in our hotel room. Oh, that's not possible. You must have left the door open. I said, we did not leave the door open. They got in. They must have had a key. Oh, no, they couldn't have it. That's not possible. Nobody else has a key except for you or the cleaning staff, right? And I said, no, this was a construction worker guy, highway construction guy. And he walked into the room across, who's in that room? Can you check? And they looked in their computer. Sir, there's nobody checked into that room. I said, well, okay, how about the room on either side of that room? Sir, there's nobody in any of those rooms. Nobody checked in any of those rooms. And I thought, wow, that is bizarre. And
that's intelligence.
This was the night before I was supposed to go and talk about my son and radiation exposure at Wright-Patterson. And so then when I went on the show, that was the night before. And then the night of the show, I had to go down into the conference room. I was able to use the conference room. While I was in the conference room doing the show at night, because it was East Coast time, so it was, later, and somebody came into the room again. My wife didn't see them, but she woke up and said, hey, get out of here. And, the door closed, and they had come in again. Now, I don't know if it was the same construction workers or people pretending to be, but it was somebody obviously trying to intimidate us. And I actually had a friend of mine who said they might not have been human beings at all. They might have been NHIs working in cahoots with the defense contractors that all want to keep a lid on all this, and they want to silence people who are going to expose anything. But I went ahead and talked about it anyway. Jimmy Church says he lives in Palmdale, and he noticed around the same time, January, February of 2023, a lot of extra activity at Edwards, planes coming and going, more than usual, cargo planes. So he said it's totally plausible. And anyway, so long story short, I invited to this conference. I'm excited, talking to Ray. Ray told you and your listeners, all these weird things started happening. The base commander got relieved. two of the people Ray was working with for the conference later on, not initially, but as it was starting to unravel, he learns that one of them's former CIA.
Yeah.
I told you that. And the other one is a former crash retrieval guy.
Yes. Yep.
Two of them. And then there's one guy, it's a more normal guy. And then there's Ray, right, who was at the Air Force Research Laboratory. He had no idea these people had that background. And then the weird story about the PAO, the public affairs officer, was sent on an emergency assignment overseas, and then the whole thing came crashing down. The mayor of Fairborn, which is right on the border there of Wright-Patterson, outside of the gates, is friends with the acting base commander, who was initially very on board with the conference, but when he was made the acting commander, when the commander was relieved, crickets, nothing.
Yep.
And then they get a response that, oh, it's in the best interest of the Air Force for us not to be involved. And then there was the weird stuff at the hotel where they couldn't get an answer about their contract, and it was so up in the air, and the money went away. And it was my son, the way he described it, the one at Wright-Patterson, said, "Dad, it's death by 1,000 cuts."
Yep.
They didn't want to make a big dramatic announcement, so they just killed it with all these little things, piece by piece, until it was done and you couldn't do it. And they obviously didn't want me or Ray or anybody else there. And technically, it is government property, the hotel where they were going to have it, the Hope Hotel. If you look on a map, the Hope Hotel used to be inside of the security perimeter of Wright-Patterson. Now it's just on the outside by the gate, but it's still government property. So they didn't want that conference to happen. And my friends were not surprised, the UFO friends I have. They said, oh, they weren't going to let that happen. And, and I think Ray he didn't want to think that, but I think he's coming around to the idea that, oh yeah, this is, they weren't going to let this happen. Maybe a couple people in the Air Force thought it would be cool, and then they got admonished. And if you look at two of the harshest critics of disclosure, so-called disclosure, right, are the two Mikes. Mike Turner from Ohio, who is a congressman that represents, you guessed it, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base,
right,
and deep into the pockets of the defense contractors, and Mike Rogers, who represents the Redstone Arsenal down in Alabama, and all their defense activity. Those are two of the guys that have killed any kind of probing that Congress can do into defense contractors involved with any of the crash retrieval or testing or reverse engineering or any of that stuff. They've made it almost impossible. And so
it shows that there is an internal battle as well that is going on.
Yes.
Within the government about this stuff. I believe Lou Elizondo even talked about this, and then it goes from people with defense contractor buy-ins and stuff like that. Yes. And then you also have the religious people.
Yes.
That are very much being antagonistic to this kind of information and things too. So that's why when Stephen Bassett had asked me, where do I think disclosure is going to come from, the little private guy in MUFON and, the little citizen scientist, or is it going to come from the government? I said, well, it's going to come from the little guy. And he's like, no, nobody. Well, like we said earlier, nobody's going to believe the government at this point. They've sullied anything that they, or soiled anything that they did with their name to being, it's like Reagan said, the 9 words you don't want to hear. Hello, we're from the government and we're here to help,
exactly.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So anyways, I think people are seeing through a lot of this stuff. Even the most people in this world politically, at least in our country, they make it sound like everybody's either far right or far left. And those are the people that get heard, screaming and doing everything. But if you talk to the majority, 85% of the people in this country, your neighbors or whatever, everybody's just kind of middle of the road. It's not like how everything's portrayed. It's like, you see people with the the family and the dog and the
Mhm.
Mercedes-Benz car on Facebook, and you think, oh, look at their life. They're all great and stuff. And then you come to find out it's a facade. It's
Yeah.
not, it's what's being presented to you versus what the reality is. And
You're exactly right. Yeah.
I think that goes for everything, especially this topic. So,
Yeah.
all
I
right,
think you're right.
everybody, we've got Dr. Bruce Olav Solheim, Ph.D., the author of the newest book, and it is I want to see if I can remember this. We Are the Aliens,
Mhm.
and it has to do with the connection of non-human intelligences with humans. So I want to dig into some of the things that I pulled out of your book.
Yeah,
Just doing
sure.
a quick read through.
Mhm.
So you sent me the dust jacket, which was
Mhm.
very interesting, and I'm reading through that, and I'm looking at Amazon, and I'm reading your book. By the way, everybody, the links are below in the show description. Check it out. Anzar says, "The time is coming. There will be war, and we will do everything we can to ameliorate. But humans have free will, and some are aided by malevolent ETs. We can help stop the malevolent ETs, but it's harder for us to stop the malevolent humans, except for the nuclear weapons." I'm
Mhm.
guessing he's talking about how they did things with like
Yeah.
Maelstrom
Mhm.
and with Robert Salas and the missile launches that they have on camera of the ICBM test, and you can see come out of the frame some type
Mhm.
of a craft, and it shoots a beam at one part of the missile, goes around, and this is all while the ICBM is taking off, and then the missile disintegrates basically
Mhm.
in the middle of the air and crashes down. So who are these malevolent ETs that Anzar is talking about and trying to warn us about?
Yeah. So there are, and it's not necessarily by the race of the ET. There are mixtures. And it basically breaks down this way. And it's not as simple as I thought it was initially, good and evil. Really, what it is control versus free will. These advanced extraterrestrials who are related to us, they feel an obligation to do something. And one of the, what I call the malevolent ones, from my perspective, because I'm very much about free will, that's my thing. What for a lot of people, I think. But they want to control human beings. They want to control us, the way I kind of look at it, if as above, so below, right? That old saying. In human societies, we have governments like the Chinese government, the communist Chinese, very controlled society, very controlled society. That's kind of like an earthbound model of what I'm talking about. And then there are, well, the United States, up to a certain point anyway, we are, free will society, so there's a difference between it. And that's the way the ETs look at it, the factions, which could be different groups, together saying, no, they need to be controlled. That's the only way this can happen. And then there's Anzar and other ETs who say, no, they need to have free will. We will provide a certain safety net, like a working with a net. We're not going to let them totally destroy themselves with nuclear missiles, but we're not going to try to control them either. It's kind of like different parenting styles.
Right.
All of us have seen that. There's the helicopter parents who won't let their children do anything for fear they'll get hurt. So, oh my God, you can't get dirty, you can't get hurt, you can't leave the house. There's people trying to kill you, whatever. And then there's the parents that, well, they got to go out there and make their own mistakes, and we'll try to keep them from killing themselves, but and help them. We're not going to, purposely let them get hurt or whatever, but we're going to let them have some, opportunities to learn on their own. And that's kind of the what's going on is between these two factions. Some of them, the more controlling types, would be like the reptilians. I don't think there's too many reptilians that favor free will. They're pretty harsh. Everybody I've had experience with them, other people have, they're pretty harsh. Anzar is in the group that would be considered, he's kind of a different mixture, the Arcturians and the Nordic types, and but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not on. There could be others from that race that also favor control. So there's not necessarily by which race they are or whatever. So his thinking, and I've had people say that, well, if they're so powerful, why don't they just do away with war and do away with our pollution and just help us do everything, and Ansar's answer to that is, well, then how are you going to learn for yourself? How are you going to, you're not going to have any free will then. You're just going to be totally controlled. And a human being needs to have free will. They need to be truly happy and content and be satisfied as a human being. And what's really sad, I've had students from, and I'm not a political guy, but I've had students from communist China, and they've got into discussions with me, and they said, okay, Dr. Solheim, you're talking about liberty and free will and democracy, but isn't it better just to have everything provided? Everything's secure. There's no rioting in the streets. We have everything under control. People get what they need, and not any more than that. And isn't that the best way to do it? And I said, I understand the theory of that, but then when it comes down to it, it also discourages independent thought. It discourages creativity. And why do we want to live? We want to live so we can enjoy a creative world. Even if we don't create art ourselves or free thought or expression or books or whatever, don't we want to live in a world where we can learn from those people, where those people can share and they have the ability to share, and we have discussions about disagreements, and I mean, you run the risk of them going awry and conflict emerging, but brush fires or whatever, but it's better to have free will. And we always get to a loggerheads, and they go, I disagree with you, and I go, I disagree with you, and then we're fine. But that's what Ansar's telling me this thing is really about. And actually Lou Elizondo, speaking of Lou Elizondo, he told a friend of mine, I'm not going to mention the friend's name, but he told a friend of mine that that the government is aware of this conflict between these two factions, and we're kind of caught in between, and it just hasn't been revealed. Now he's never said that, as far as I know, publicly. Maybe it'll be in his long-awaited book that they supposedly is coming out, but then he says it's not yet and long ways away or whatever.
Right.
Maybe it will be. But I think I've asked Ansar about him, and I said, what do you think about him? And he said, well, no, he's a good guy, but he is controlled still. And the same with David Grush. Yeah, he's a good guy. He's telling the truth as best as he knows it, but he's also being controlled. Everybody's being controlled who's in those positions that know things, and it doesn't take much. I know that through just happenstance, through some of the experiences I've had, psychic experiences I've had, I was sent to Chicago to be tested by a film producer, right? And I had some really interesting experiences. But one of the things I learned was that the previous person he had tested, he found out that guy was the most powerful remote viewer and psychic in America, probably one of the best in the world. But when our government found out that he was hanging around with this film producer and being filmed doing these remarkable readings, and they shut him down. They said, no, you can't do that. This poor guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but this poor guy works for the government. He's not allowed to travel outside of the United States. His movements are constantly monitored. He has whatever he needs. He gets money, he gets cars, he gets whatever he wants, but he's controlled. And it's because he has these incredible gifts. I don't know about you. I'm pretty sure I can guess what you would say. Yes, it would be great to have all those psychic gifts, but I don't want to be controlled like that. I don't, it's like that old show, British show, The Prisoner, being controlled and just mind manipulated like that all the time. You're too valuable. They don't want him to travel outside of the United States because the Russians, the Chinese, whoever would want to get a hold of the guy, and then they
Right.
could turn him into a psychic slave, which is basically in a way what he is even here in our freedom loving country, because he's too valuable. And it comes down to what a psychic told me a long time ago. he said, "You're as psychic as you need to be," which is kind of interesting.
That is very interesting. Wow. And we've got people that work with the CIA, and there have been people that have come out and they started YouTube channels and all kinds of things. I'm trying to get some on this show.
Yeah.
Because they have experience with Skinwalker Ranch, and you wonder, if they're controlled or not still with all of the knowledge they have. And then you hear they love talking about the things that they learn in CIA, the PSYOP, and how it works. I mean, they're very open about it, and it's very frightening how they can manipulate and use your own psychology against you.
Yeah.
And so it would not surprise me that if they found these people that have some type of gift or something like that, that they would manipulate them, and they would be able to manipulate them without that person even knowing that they're being manipulated. They're that good.
I've had I had an interesting experience when I was a Fulbright professor in northern Norway. There's 600 people that are picked every year by the Fulbright Commission to go overseas and teach their subject. Mine was U.S. foreign policy, so I went to Norway, and they sent me to Norway because I could speak Norwegian. I still have a house in Norway. I can blend in with the people, right? So I went around, gave speeches, taught at the university, and some people from the embassy contacted me and said, "Yeah, we would really like to establish something at the library there at the university, but we've met with resistance. So we're hoping that you could provide some inroads and talk to them and get, we just want a small section of the library dedicated to American culture and so forth. And we call our program American Corners." That's what they called it, right? And I thought, well, that sounds pretty nice and innocuous. So I'm working on this, and I'm meeting with resistance, from my colleagues, and anyway, then they say, and we have people that can come to your college or to the university and give a speech, talk to the students. I said, "Oh yeah, that's great. Send some people." Well, I don't know what I was expecting, but two guys arrived, and I think you know where I'm going with this. Two guys arrived from the embassy, and they looked like two special forces guys. They were incredibly fit. They were young. They were very highly intelligent, and they gave a really good, very pro-American, take on the war in Iraq, because that was back in 2003. So
Sure.
we just invaded, and they were taking some harsh questions, but they were really smart. They were really light on their feet. They know what to do. And then afterwards, I was walking them over to get some food or whatever, and they knew their way around, and they knew all this, and they started asking me about my colleagues. They said, "Yeah, what do you think about this professor? We have some questions about them." And they seem to be very anti-American. And I said, "Well, they're friends of mine, but I like them. They might have some criticisms, but I don't." And they were like looking for intel on two of these people who are very, I'm just going to say they lean towards communism. But I had friends that are communists. I had a professor who was a communist. I also had a professor who was a CIA guy. So I like to hear all perspectives. It's okay. I can decide for myself. I don't get swayed really by anybody. So, but they started asking questions, and then I started to ask myself, are they trying to get me to work for them? And these are really CIA guys? I don't think these are just they're not embassy employees. Yeah, they might work at the embassy, but these are not regular embassy guys. These are CIA agents, highly trained.
That's what Lou Elizondo said, that he was.
Yeah.
That he was counterintelligence. And if people don't understand what counterintelligence is, it's when you want to find out what the enemy knows about you. So these guys, and even Ray Szymanski says, he goes and gives these talks, and he asks people to raise their hand if they are former intelligence employees or worked in intelligence or military intelligence, and some hands will go up. And then one time, I think it was down there in Dayton, he did that, and like 40 hands went up.
Sure.
They want to know what you guys know.
Yeah, exactly. It was an interesting experience. And then, so my theory was you could be working for the CIA, not like as a paid employee, but you could be working for the CIA and not even know it, because you think, oh, I'm just a patriotic guy. I'm trying to do, which is where I was coming from. Yes, I love Norway. I love America. My parents were from Norway. I love both countries, but I'm an American. I served in the U.S. military. So, yeah, I thought I was doing my patriotic duty, and I didn't know until after that wait a second. And and then I asked my two friends that they'd asked about. I said, I kind of suspect those guys were probably intelligence people, and they go,
yeah,
oh yeah, of course they were. And then I told them the questions they were asking. Oh yeah, they, it was pretty interesting. But yeah, and I didn't say this, but I'm still going to Wright-Patterson. My wife and I are gonna be staying at the Hope Hotel from those dates where we would have had the conference, because I already had reservations for the hotel, and I want to visit my two sons.
Sure,
so I'm going to be there. And if any people are listening, I'm going to be there. And I'm going to give some talks when I'm there at a library, at a bookstore, and I'm going to talk about whatever. I'm a free citizen. I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. That doesn't mean I'm not patriotic or don't love my country or, any of that. I just want my son and the people who got sick to get the help they need. Because I also, I eventually called my member of Congress and got an investigation started. But then the Air Force stonewalled it again and said, oh, no, your son is going to have to provide, releases, for us to do anything. And then my son balked and he said, wait a second, Dad, this whole whistleblower thing, that you think we have protection from, nah, that's not the way the real world works. I mean, even if you look at Grush, what happened to him as soon as it was made known? They went after the poor guy. He had to go get attorneys and, high-powered attorneys to protect him, and they went after.
They were digging up dirt on him really fast.
Oh yeah. So.
Well, we've got a few minutes left here, and there was something else that I wanted to pull out of your book that really stood out at me. And I don't know, it's probably just my own mindset. So I had all this kind of stuff come through, and Anzar says, only through suffering do you learn. And I took that as a direct quote. And I look at our society and the world in general today. I call it the snowflake culture, right? We got safe spaces, words, words you cannot say and things you can't talk about because you might offend somebody. In some of these cases, like tough love hurts, but then you learn, it's don't necessarily help your kid up right when they fall off of a bike and start crying. Tell them, hey, get up, brush it off, so sometimes your feelings get hurt, right? Sometimes someone close to you passes away, or you have to deal with very difficult situations, but you learn through those. We kind of learn like a sword. We go through a fire, we got to get beat on, and we get sharper and stronger. So if Anzar knows this basic truth, like Buddha says, life is suffering, right? What does he think, or what do you think of how things are turning out now with what we're seeing with these new generations of kids that yell and scream to get what they want? They're very disrespectful, and not just kids, it's people as well. But almost like they are in this protected bubble of a protected subclass of everything out there. And you can't, that's a microaggression. You can't look at me. There are girls filming guys in gyms. They are literally wearing skin tight next to nothing in the gyms to work out, and a guy walks by and looks at them, and they count. If they look longer than 3 seconds at me, I'm screaming. they're
Yeah.
staring at, right? Well, you're wearing next to nothing in a gym.
Yeah.
And you're talking
Yeah.
about a testosterone factory, for God's sakes.
Yes. Let's be
So
real.
yeah, let's be realistic here. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on the only through suffering do you learn?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really good advice because yeah, well, I think it was also said this way. I think somebody in show business said that that you learn nothing from success. You learn from failure, and failure, then try enough times, you get that success. And then what do you worry about? Really sharp people always worry that they're not always going to be successful. They got to keep working at it, whatever their craft is, whether it's teaching or whatever it is.
Correct.
And I think that as far as this generation, I can kind of forgive the kids for being, I'm just going to say it, ignorant about what's going on in the world and to be out of it. It is our responsibility as adults to help them understand the way the world is. Elders have that responsibility. I take that seriously. I know you guys do too with the younger generation. You can almost forgive them for being a little radical or being a little wrong. But what I cannot forgive is the elders who are pushing them to do this stuff. And I'm talking about protesting and being totally out of it, like doing very terrible things that like stop traffic or destruction of property and all this stuff. I don't think the young people know that they're being very foolish and they're not respecting what they have or
They're being
thankful for.
controlled.
Yes, there are professors, and I can just say this because I'm in academia and college and universities. There's only about probably less than 10% of those that are teaching at a university, especially universities, that would be considered conservative in any way. 85 to 90% are very liberal or extremely liberal. And what's interesting is that I have never changed. I'm not a political person, but my basic views are very middle of the road. I've never changed. I was considered at one point in the 80s, I was considered a liberal, a classic liberal. Now I'm considered, if people I don't classify myself. I always just say I'm an American. The people, are you Democrat, Republican, liberal? I say I'm an American.
Declare your tribe, sir.
Yeah, that's all you need to know. I'm a free spirit. I can think whatever I want. I'm not going to drink anybody's Kool-Aid. But now a lot of people, oh, you must be a conservative. I said, I have not changed one bit. The system has changed.
Yeah, the goalposts keep moving.
The paradigm has shifted, right? So that's what Anzar has impressed upon me, is that yes, the kids are going to suffer, and they're going to learn from it. But we have to help ameliorate it. We have to help them lick their wounds, help them, so they can lick their own wounds and learn from it, and to not push them into terrible situations where we know it's not going to work out for them, and then try to help them from self-destructing. And they have a big responsibility. They got a lot of stuff they're going to have to do when they get into positions of power. I don't know who these professors are that are out there, or these so-called leaders out there promoting this kind of stuff. I think it's terrible. I think they should be ashamed of themselves. And I'm not, like I've said, I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. I'm just an American.
Right.
I think that we have a big responsibility. And I talk about this stuff in my class. I just wrote a recent lecture on modern day America, my modern U.S. history class. And I take this concept of DEI on. And I break it down. I talk about how, like for instance, the 1619 project. People are being forced. Okay, you either have to teach the 1619 project, or you got to teach the 1776. That's the only two ways to look at the American Revolution or the founding of America. And I said that's not the only two ways to look at it. You're trying to force people into making this binary decision. I thought everybody was not about binary stuff anymore. What are you talking about here? Yes, there are elements of 1619 that need to be discussed and have been discussed for the whole time I've been teaching as as a a white male, I've been talking about 1619, the significance of it, the introduction of slaves. And actually, it was before that, before 16, it was like 15 something, 1569 or whatever it was. So there's actually before that. So even the title is not right. But, you can't throw everything out and just say, well, we can't use 1776 because that's racist or that's this or that's that. These were slave owners. And I said, can you imagine 200 years from now what people are going to think of us? They're going to come back and say, oh, they were meat eaters. Didn't they realize that eating animals was wrong and that they also have and that may very well be. I don't know. But I want to be judged by where I live now. And that's how I call it historical thinking. You got to judge people by their, how good were they given the time period they were in and trying to do the best they could, with what they have. That's how you end up people, young people are told by elders, once again, misguided elderly people that should be ashamed of themselves, to go tear down the statue of Abraham Lincoln or Ulysses S. Grant. And I said, do you understand the significant contributions those two people made? And you're going to tear their statues down? I mean, yeah, with all the Confederate well, first of all, they weren't in the Confederacy.
Right.
Do you understand the Civil War? I mean, what it was fought about? Oh, no, not really. Okay, well.
Well, you're a history professor. I had a history professor talk to me one day, and he said, what you're seeing is what you guys call presentism, where you're taking the morality and the ethics of today and trying to superimpose it on something that happened hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. People just don't understand how different the world in our country was just 100 years ago. No concept at all.
It's right. And Bill Burr is kind of funny. He's a funny comedian.
Oh yeah.
He brought up John Wayne. He said he read an article about somebody who had recently read a statement that John Wayne made in like 1959, and they're just chastising John Wayne and let's erase him from television or film history. And I'm thinking, they're judging somebody by what they said in 1959. I mean, come on, give me a break. The dude's been dead for 50 years, and you're going to go back and dig something up that he said. I mean, what terrible things have I said in my life, or anybody for that matter? And somebody digs that up, 50 years from now and said, oh, they must have been this. Look we just got to erase them from history. And he was who he was, and that's all a person can be, is be who you are. And if you end up being, that's not acceptable in the future, you just have to look back and say, well, we've progressed since then. And, it's things are evolving and changing, and that's, people are going to think the same of us. So we have to be kind to ourselves, our future selves, by realizing we did the best we could, and I'm not talking about evil people. There are evil people who do terrible things.
Sure.
But most people are just people trying to do the best they can and be as good a person as they can, so.
Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, just, you got to live right now. I mean, that's the best you can do. And that's just it. Keep an open mind, So, and speaking of that, one last thing before we end it for tonight. As you were saying earlier, you're an educator and you're a professor. You're at Citrus College in Glendora, California. But you also were doing a paranormal history class, and then you stopped that, and now you're starting it up again, from what I understand. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, from 2018 to 2020. So basically when the pandemic started. So for 2 years, I taught a paranormal personal history class, and that was part of my big reveal. I wanted to start talking about all this stuff publicly. And it was I had such a good response. That first class in 2018, I had 35 students. It was an evening class, and I had people from 18 to 80 in the class. They all had the same thing in common. They had these tremendous experiences, be they alien or ghost or whatever, and they had nobody to talk to safely about it. And I'm not talking about a safe space necessarily. I'm just talking about somewhere where people will listen to them and not immediately ridicule them, maybe ask them hard questions or, be skeptical. That's fine. I even
like
had
AA for paranormal.
Yes, exactly. It was great. It was great. I had all these lectures planned, and then I found out, oh man, I just have to give half of the time to people just talking about their experiences. So then I learned quickly I can turn the lectures into frameworks. Like they'll mention something and they'll say, okay, here's kind of the history of that kind of phenomena. And this is what scientists think. Okay, let's go on to the next story. Okay, and then somebody will tell it and I frame it, and that's kind of the way we had to do it. I brought in guest speakers too. So anyway, I tried to do it during the pandemic online. People said, nah, we don't want it. We want to be in person.
Yep.
And I said, I understand. I dig it. Can't do it. So now I've been teaching online ever since, and I'm going back in the fall to teaching in person again, and I'm going to bring back the class. And I've kept all these people informed all the time. I share, what I do, and they keep saying, you got to bring the class back. We just can't wait to take the class again. And I had people that took it every single time. They didn't just take it once. Because it was always something new that we were dealing with. So I'm really looking forward to it in the fall. In person, night class. I met so many incredible people. A lot of people in the class were psychics themselves, like professional psychics. So they enjoyed it. And I had skeptics in the class that by the end of the class, they were kind of agnostic, thinking, I wonder,
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm trying to convert people. I'm just saying, okay, this is my experience. This is what I think's going on. And what do you guys think, So
yeah. No, that's awesome. All right. Well, we are already at the 1 hour and 56 minute mark.
Oh, really? Okay. All
Yes.
right.
It has gone by fast. It's been a great show.
Thank you. Guys.
Yeah, this has been awesome. The new book, once again, everybody, it is, let me see. I can't, We Are the Aliens. I don't know why.
Yeah.
You know why I'm getting confused? I have a friend who's got a book out called It's Not Aliens Worse, It's Us.
Oh, okay.
And so those titles keep going back and forth in my head.
I understand. Yeah. And I always have to give a shout out to Gene Thorkelson, my childhood friend who passed away, that started this whole thing for me. He's the one who gave me that title too. We are the aliens. So
yeah. And just before we go, we got Penny Passon.
Yeah.
Who says,
from Ohio.
Enjoying the show. Yep, from Ohio. Says, hi, Bruce. While disappointed the Hangar 18 conference was stopped, so looking forward to your talk at our library.
Oh, yeah.
Back here in Ohio. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, she has an organization there kind of north of Dayton. And I've found out about her and we connected. She's a very nice person. And I'm looking forward to talking to their group. So it'll be an in-person thing. And I do a thing at a bookstore and maybe a thing with Ray. Ray's trying to work on that where we have
that'd be cool
together. So that would be fun. He's a good guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, and lastly, is there social media that people can hit you up on or want to talk to you or send you their experiences? How would you want them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can. My website is bruceolavsolheim.com. So just my whole name that you see there, just squished together, bruceolavsolheim.com. And I have contact information there and email. They can shoot me an email. They can see all the books I've written, all the, comic books too. I got comic books that approach the subject from a fictional, semi-fictional standpoint. And so they're entertaining for, younger kids who want to get into the subject, but, don't want to get into the hard stuff yet, all the comics are all all ages comics. So they're
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I got it covered there. And thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah.
Michelle. And maybe one of these days we'll get to meet.
Yeah. One of these times you're in Ohio.
I was going to say, every time you mention Toledo, I'm like, God, that's not far from us.
Yeah.
This time I'm just going to Dayton, so I'm not going up to Toledo this time. But yeah, that would be great. Right. I would love that.
Okay, well, have a great night, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Yep. Take care. All right, everybody. Man, I knew it was going to be a great show, but Michelle and I have got to run. So, Michelle, what do you think?
Have a great night, everyone.
Have a great night, everybody. And remember, I know it's fast. We're cutting out of here, but keep those eyes to that sky. Have a good night.